In this episode, Darrell and I discuss how metrics can become a slippery slope if they become the sole focus when building software. Even if you don't know who we are, Darrell and I were co-founders of a company called RealBase, which we recently sold for 180 million. I was CTO and Darrell was head of product. So let's jump into today's episode. All right. Hello, Darrell.
Hello.
How are you, mate?
Good, thank you.
That's excellent. Are you ready to talk about Goodhart's Law?
Yeah, this one piqued my interest when I saw it in the list. Tell me more.
Tell you more. Goodhart's Law in software engineering. We should be specific about that because we like to talk about software and business. So Goodhart's Law. So we found an article. I'm just trying to find the link here quickly. It's about measuring things. When you start measuring things and they actually become the core of the process rather than the actual outcome. The thing you're measuring becomes the outcome rather than actually doing the thing. So I'll just give an example of this because it is a bit confusing in how I've explained that. Where this is like where managers can come in and say like, hey, we care about test coverage, right? Because test coverage is a proxy for how thoroughly tested our software is. And then we need to test lots of things from the same lines of code, and then our worst bugs are emergent at the integration level. So basically, we do feature testing or unit testing and all those test paths, but then the actual app doesn't even work because yes, your function passes and that it's all great, but when you put them all together, it doesn't even do what it needs to do. Right. So we've seen this before. We have seen this before many times. And you start measuring things like that. Or you say, I care about the time spent pairing and code reviewing and debugging and like time on screen. And that's me measuring how productive you are. And that's what we're going to be measuring. So we're going to measure productivity rather than actually measuring how our team's working together to actually get these products out. We're busy measuring the things. And it comes out of a good place, I guess. It's like people are trying to measure. It's like the same thing we talk about. What was it? The sprints, and the points, like how many points you got, and you guys have completed 10 points this week, and that's what we care about. We know we're being productive because we're finishing our 10 sprint points per week. That's what we care about. So we're productive, but meanwhile, like you're not actually delivering anything of use to your customer, and then you're actually not going anywhere, but you're doing really great on the board. So yeah, what do you? I know that you really like this topic.
Well, I mean, I've seen this just recently. So you've got notes here about the DORA reports. DORA metrics are implemented in Domain, and I saw this recently where people were asking for things to be pushed in within a certain time frame just to meet the metrics. So let's get this feature in. Someone says, "Oh, it's not really ready. I'd like to test them all." Well, let's just get it in this week so it doesn't affect our metrics. That is a perfect example of something that you're tracking for immediately hurting the product. And it's harder to quantify because, yeah, maybe you push it in and it goes right, but is the quality of it better? I would say anything like this, if you lean towards numbers as a measure of good value, good productivity, whatever you want to say, you're always going to lose quality in some regard.
It's such a tough one because it's such a manager kind of C-level thing, right? Like it's when it all matters. It's like, yeah, you need to stand up at the shareholder meeting or something. You have to be like, we're killing it because of this. Like we delivered, we fixed 10,000 bugs. And it's like, well, yeah, that's cool. Like, because bug closing has become a metric that's important. So people just try and close heaps of bug tickets. Or how many tickets did we do this week? That's not actually important. Like, it's
how many
cool
lines
for a
of
metric.
code is in this feature?
Yeah, like test coverage is a great one. Like people can spend ages doing, like I saw this on Twitter actually today. Someone just talking about like they want to get 100% test coverage, and some guy just goes, that having 100% test coverage doesn't mean you have no bugs. It just means that you've got every function's being tested. That doesn't mean that there are no bugs. And that's 100% true as well. Like we've had test coverage where, you have these edge case bugs that come in even though it's tested. So the metrics are checked. But,
if you test a function, or if a developer writes a test for a function that he wrote, but he misunderstood the feature request and it doesn't do what the user was expecting it to do. What good was the test? Well, yeah, it works. It doesn't do the job that it was meant to, but it technically works.
We had this in QC a lot too, remember? We had this a lot in QC where like people would say like, yeah, I did that. And even template building. Actually, template building was a good one where it was like, I finished 6 templates, but yeah, none of them were done right. So the metric was right there until you actually introduced another step where you actually like how many times the revisions were made.
Yeah.
Like you start measuring different metrics. So it could also be important to like make sure you're measuring the right metrics. But it's very, he just says here, Goodhart's law is a warning for pointy head bosses who end up with terrible metrics. Lines added, feature points done. There we go. That's the one I'm talking about. And then he says, etc. And he said, I'm more interested in how it affects the metrics we set for ourselves that our bosses might never know about. So yeah, that's the metrics that we care about, right? It's like building features that are, actually work for the user. The user's actually delighted when they use your product. What makes them feel like this is something that I want to keep using? And it gets really difficult like when you start adding that layer of management on top. And I guess that's something that we kind of avoided most of our...
keeping a flat hierarchy, it's a bit easier. I definitely see why people feel like they need it. And it's probably just a lack of clarity on like what actually matters. Like all these numbers, they're safe to fall back on. They're safe for a manager to say, this is improving. It's very easy to communicate. Number goes up, graph goes up, green line goes this way. It's very easy to communicate that and be like, yes, we're doing a good job. And unless you're really, really in-depth CSAT score on every customer interaction, there's no real way to like quantitatively say the product is getting better. So if you don't have really confident leadership with a very strong vision, this is where you're going to fall back to every time, is like, what numbers can we kind of look at that we could get an indication that it's getting better? Because if the leaders don't have enough context on what the people are doing, they're not going to understand what good and bad looks like, and they can't get a good visual representation of that.
I think it's a really hard problem, to be honest. I think like it's easy to say, but like at that large scale, like, because even Amazon used to have like, don't tell me things like it's way worse. Tell me in a number. It's like, it's performing 17% worse. It's like, yes, okay. So like our team's developing productivity levels have dropped 13% because that's what he expects from you. He's like, don't just tell me that my teams suck. Tell me how much percentage points they suck by. And how do you measure that?
You absolutely need it at scale. Because all that matters is like everything, like if nothing else happened, but everything in the business was getting 1% better and you were measuring it, your business is getting a lot better day on day, year on year. If you've just got that across the board, and I think it's very hard to just add qualitative stuff into those numbers so that you're not constantly chasing the 100% of things that probably don't matter.
Yeah. And another one here that's actually quite good in software is benchmarks. Like benchmarking for performant software. And you see people like micro optimizing certain benchmarks to get this thing, but overall it actually does make no difference. I've seen that many times. I really like that one. Like being productive is like, spend pairing or code reviewing, like how much time you're spending. That means that you're being productive. And this is where AI can just come and disrupt a whole bunch of these things. Like imagine if you're measuring time spent code reviewing as a productivity indicator. Now you get a tool, which I saw Theo talking about the other day, was a new AI code reviewing tool, and that comes and does your job for you. Now all of that code review
I think I've seen that one. I've seen that program before.
It disappears. Now you're not doing any code review. Now what, are you not more productive anymore? Well, actually, guess what? You're actually more productive because you now actually get to spend more time building features rather than reviewing code. So that metric, they take it up and they go, oh, look, they've dropped reviewing time by 90%. These guys are actually not as productive anymore, until they realize, oh, hey, actually that's a good thing because now they're actually working more on X. Another one that's really funny is people, like how much time you are spent in meetings. Like,
I would love to track this one in any future businesses going forward, and the cost of the meetings. I heard the Shopify lead engineer or something from Shopify the other day saying exactly this. They built a G Suite Google Calendar plugin for that. Every meeting has the price per minute.
I wish
it's like a little ticker in the Google Meet down the bottom. It's like, this is it just cost $100, $500, depending on who's in the room. So that you're really like paying attention to it.
Yeah, I think that's like, I wish they could open source that, because that would be so freaking sick to be able to see that and just be like, nah, man, like you're not going to spend $100,000 or, you know, all hands meeting, for instance.
Yeah, I would guess that it can't be open source because they built their own HR onboarding thing, and it's probably like the numbers are plugged into that and it wouldn't be useful for anyone else. But I thought it was pretty interesting.
It'd be a
but
sick
it's
tool.
Like the productivity thing's tough because I think the desire to make people work or write lines of code to a time frame, like it's very disconnected from what thought work actually is. And like a lot of the time thinking can be misconstrued as not working when really you might be helping to solve a complex problem. So like how do you ever really measure that?
I think it's like one of those things. It's like, it's so hard to do, and you can't like not measure either, because then it's like, well, it doesn't matter. And then some people can, because the problem, I think the problem is that in the world, there's people that are really try, like you can see like that person's going to try regardless. They're never going to take the piss. Whereas you're like, oh, well, this person is just taking the piss now because I spend 2 days thinking and then I got the perfect thing. But if their result doesn't come out on the other end, and this is where you have to just be close to the, I guess, really close to the team and understand the product, you know, if you're managing someone. So it's really good
to have really good context. Yeah.
Yeah. So like you can say like, no, well, actually you spent 2 days thinking, that's cool, that's great. But then the product, the solution you came up with was crap. You could have just not spent time thinking, done the same, and it would have been the end, and we would have saved 2 days. And then by the time review came, we could have fixed it. And you know, so it's like being close to the fire. And I think that's like smaller teams where smaller teams win. It's like, and having people that are really close to that and like actually, like I think software managers should know how to do software. They should know the product. They shouldn't be just a product manager that knows how to run a product and knows nothing about software, because you're like, just get it done. Just get it done. Like, why isn't it done? Just do it. And it's like, do you want to do it? Like, it's not as simple as you say. And it's like, oh no, like, and especially when people start getting dangerous, you know, that like curve where they're like at the bottom, they think they know everything. And it's like, no, you just plug in this service, and why don't you just get ChatGPT to write it for you? Like, oh, this is easy to do an integration to X service because you just get ChatGPT to do it. And it's like, well, no, actually not. It's not actually that simple. So that's where it gets dangerous. But I think if you have people that are like in the team actually writing code and understand how big a feature should be, it makes it much easier to say and see when people are being productive, because you know, like that should take this long. Like at the skill level, it should take X long. And then if they're hitting that, you can be like, yes, that person is doing what they need to do.
Yep. I think it's like having just experience going from being like a product leader in many products to being working alongside an engineering lead. It gets just more difficult. Anytime you add more pieces to a conversation or pie, it gets more difficult to understand. And like the bigger your company gets, if someone's not like ruthlessly efficient about keeping it well architected, the amount of things that you have to connect to, they're going to make everything worse. They're going to make the time take longer. And a PM is really going to struggle to understand that. I really struggle to understand that day to day in big businesses.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a hard problem to solve, but it's something to just keep an eye out. Like, am I measuring the right thing? Am I looking at the right metrics? Should I adjust? Because you can just.
It sounds like as soon as you've created the metric, you've pretty much lost it. It's instantly worthless. You see this outside of tech too, like salespeople. They've got a target to meet within a year, and then they push business to the next year, so that because they've already made their target in a year, they will get the customer to wait until the next year and then sign them up. Terrible for the business, but it's based on performance metrics that someone implemented at some point because they were very valuable. So I guess I don't know what the answer is, just keep monitoring them.
Yep.
Keep changing them all the time.
Definitely. And if that is like a thing, then just do a super uplift, like a sales one, you could just do a massive uplift if you surpass the metric, right? And the negative is not as hard. You know, like if you've gone and you've pumped up this year and you've really smashed it, give a reward big enough to make up for the loss the next year, rather than let them just cruise and be like, I hit the cap, cool, I'm good. Because that does happen with metrics. People go, oh, well, I've closed my tickets for the week. I'm just going to sit here until next Monday.
Yep.
I've done my job.
Yeah, like customer support. If you're optimizing for time spent on the phone because you wanted to reduce the time the customers spend on the phone, you could end up just having pushy, rushy customer support people who don't help you. So if your numbers were good there, you would also just need the qualitative of asking a few people how their experience was and then contrasting the two things together, because you can't just have that number alone.
In the end of the day, a lot of it, like how happy is your customer, is like one of the biggest metrics I think that actually matters. Because in the end of the day, if your customer's super happy, you can put up prices and look, they're not going to be too happy about that, but they're going to stay. And in the end of the day, as Hormozi says, putting up prices is the easiest way to make more profit. So he's found that as the biggest or the easiest tool to use is put up the price. Now, if you don't have happy customers, can't do it. And guess what? You're going downhill real fast.